Translation: O twice-born Brahmanas, still his mind was not satisfied, although he engaged himself in working for the total welfare of all people. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srila Vyasadeva was not satisfied with himself, although he had prepared literatures of Vedic value for the all-around welfare of the general mass of people. It was expected that he would be satisfied by all such activities, but ultimately he was not satisfied. Evang pravritasya sada bhutanang shreyasi dvijaha savatmake napi yada natushad dridayang tataha. O twice-born Brahmins, still his mind was not satisfied, although he engaged himself in working for the total welfare of all people. Amagyana timarandasya jananjana shalakaya chakshurum militang jena tasmai shi gurave namaha vanchakalpaturubhyascha kripasindubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasri Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Good morning. Hare Krishna. Two important words here, or at least two words struck me as important. Words or concepts, if you like, or ideas. First is in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions the word satisfaction. There are different words, aren't there, for it. When I was I've just come back from Mayapur recently, but one devotee was suggesting we have a book, Chant and Be Happy. He was suggesting he wasn't too happy with the word happy because there are different words for happy, such as fulfillment. He said it'd be better if we had something like fulfillment. Of course, it's okay, but there are different words. You'll notice today that in the popular press, when someone passes away, a popular comment is, he was a fun-loving person. So the word fun is there. Of course, perhaps to be a fun-loving person isn't that much of a compliment because there are different types of happiness. But the concept of happiness is an important one. Perhaps the need to become fulfilled, contented. Interesting words. Second term is Shreyas. Shreyasi here. Shreyas means the ultimate good. It's an important concept in our tradition, Prayas and Shreyas. Prayas means that which is immediately satisfying. Shreyas, that which is ultimately satisfying, the ultimate good. Some recent studies have shown by non-devotees that one of the best criteria for ascertaining how successful a child or young person will be, those of us who are teachers may know this, when they develop into adults or an adult life, they're always looking for criteria. What will make us successful? Is there something that we can see in children? Is there some trait that we can develop in children that will ensure that they are happy, they're successful in life? And one of the traits they've found is the ability to delay gratification. They did an experiment where they gave children, let's devotionalize it a little bit, they gave them one piece of burfi, or they gave them a sweet. And they said, if you actually manage not to eat this in the next 20 minutes, we'll give you a second sweet. Moksha Lakshmi, you might try this. Of course, some of the children couldn't resist it. Immediately, they'll take the burfi. And some of the children would actually manage to hold on for 20 minutes and get a second sweet. Those of us who are involved in business will know that if you want to be a good businessman or businesswoman, you can't spend the money as soon as you get it. Yeah. Vishwambara Prabhu, yeah. You have to invest. So this ability to delay gratification is extremely important. Austerity, actually, tapas. You delay. You're able to actually control the senses. So a very important concept. So the ultimate good is being discussed here. There are various goods. That word goods, sometimes we think of goods as being those things that are in shops, but the word good comes from the Greek philosophers. What is the ultimate good? There are usually 4 goods according to our tradition. Dharma, artha, karma, and moksha. So religiosity, followed by economic development, followed by sense gratification, and ultimately moksha, liberation. Generally speaking, that the best of those goods is moksha. But it's significant that Lord Chaitanya has added a 5th good, an ultimate good, a different goal of life. Prema Pamato Mahan, a 5th goal, a 5th good, which is prema. Sometimes we devotees, we think that actually liberation is the ultimate goal of life, but in actual fact it's not. Devotees don't reject liberation, except perhaps one of the 5 types, which is merging. What's the Sanskrit for that type of liberation, merging? There's one name for that type of the 5 types of liberation. Saruja, thank you, Saruja Mukti. Yeah, merging with they will reject that. Yeah. But other types of liberation we can accept. But there's a higher goal, prema, very important concept. Now, now this chapter, I'd like to focus on this because this narrative here is focusing on, and we'll see how this unfolds because it's very interesting how the Bhagavatam progresses. But this seems to be focusing on neglecting the ultimate good. If we don't actually attain that ultimate good, then everything is a waste of time. It seems reasonable to suggest that without some concept of an absolute, there can't be any ultimate good. I want to explain. Unless there's some kind of absolute, how can you have an ultimate good? If everything is relative, how can there be an ultimate good? There are a lot of debates about this. There must be an absolute to be an ultimate good. Not very popular these days, is it, to have an absolute truth? People don't like it these days. There's a lot of problems with relativity. What is good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is good for me. There are some challenges with that. I'd like to discuss this a little bit. There's an interesting quote. I'd just like to read a couple of quotes on the idea of a relative truth. By the way, I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. Just going to read a quote from this book. It's a philosophy book. But relativism has a very bad press from most moral philosophers. The freshman relativist, this is the student in the first year of university, is a nightmare figure of introductory classes in ethics, rather like the village atheist. Yet there is a very attractive side to relativism, which is its association with toleration of different ways of living. In other words, we very much see that if you can actually say everyone's truth is right, then it seems that we're more inclusive. Yeah? Nobody is comfortable now with the blanket colonial certainty that just our way of doing things is right, and that other people need forcing into those ways. Just like the British, when the British went to India, then they thought we were civilizing the native. We won't get into that discussion right now. We don't have time. But that was the idea, that our truth is right. And therefore we have some kind of, not only right, but some responsibility to actually impose that on others. It is good that the 19th century alliance between the missionary and the police has more or less vanished. A more pluralistic and relaxed appreciation of human diversity is often a welcome antidote to an embarrassing imperialism. So it's relevant here because this narrative seems to be going towards a kind of absolute idea, and everything else is useless. But I want to see. I'm going to ask. We're going to look at this. We're going to explore it a little bit. I'm going to actually point out a couple of problems with relativism, and there's a wonderful story here which I thought was interesting. He's talking about a friend of his who was present at a high-powered ethics institute which put on a forum in which representatives of the great religions held a panel debate. First, the Buddhist talked of the ways to calm, the mastery of desire, the path of enlightenment. He probably also mentioned mindfulness, which is very popular these days. Yeah. And the panelists all said, "Wow, terrific. If that works for you, that's great." Then the Hindu talked of the cycle of suffering and birth and rebirth, the teachings of Krishna, and the way to release. And they all said, "Wow, terrific. If that works for you, that's great." And so on, until the Catholic priest talked of the message of Jesus Christ, the promise of salvation, and the way to life eternal. And they all said, "Wow, terrific. If that works for you, that's great." And he thumped the table and shouted, "No, it's not a question of if it works for you. It's the true word of the living God. And if you don't believe it, you're all damned to go to hell." And they all said, "Wow, terrific. If that works for you, that's great." Do you see the tension here? We cannot be relativists. There's another problem with relativism, just briefly, and that is if we say that every truth is right for everyone, that is a universal principle. And immediately we're no longer speaking of relative truth, but absolute truth. My absolute principle is every truth is right for everyone. So there's an inner contradiction, so it's wrong. But this is, by the way, this is a very important subject for us as devotees. In our preaching, sometimes we're talking about watering down the message, and then we've also got our die-hard fanatics, a few as well. So we do have a whole spectrum, trying to negotiate this understanding of there being some kind of truth that's absolute, having an absolute truth, as is being mentioned here. And this seems to be the way the message is going, actually. If you don't actually reach Krishna, the ultimate good, then actually one's morality is a waste of time, one's practice is a waste of time. And yet there's other questions to be answered here. And I'm actually going to look at those. Actually, the writer of this book, whose name is Simon Blackburn, he's an atheist, actually, although he writes quite well. He actually mentions this tension between the kind of fanatical absolutism on one side and a kind of tepid, lukewarm relativism on the other. He says, there must be a course between the soggy sands of relativism and the cold rocks of dogmatism. I'd like to explore that a little bit. I'd like us to look at this because as we move through this section of the Bhagavatam, it seems now, when I read this, I thought, oops, this seems to speak of a kind of really absolutist message, and I felt a little disquiet with that. But actually, as you move through this chapter and into the next chapter, you'll find actually it isn't quite like that. We need to look at how the other goods in life, the things we value, the things that are useful for human beings, fit in to the ultimate good. What's the connection through? And that process, of course, is called yoga. Srila Vyasadeva gives an interesting clue, and I was surprised to read this. I'd missed it. I don't know how. I'd been around a few years and I'd missed it, but it's so pertinent. In the purport to the very first verse of the Bhagavatam. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that Srila Vyasadeva invokes a Gayatri, Dhimahi. We know those who chant the Gayatri, Dhimahi. He invokes the Gayatri, and Srila Prabhupada explains why. He says, to enter into the Leela of the Lord, to be qualified to enter into the Leela, one has to first become situated in Sattva Gun, the mode of goodness. One has to become a Brahmin. Otherwise, you cannot enter into the Leela of the Lord. If we think we're going to skip the mode of goodness, it is rather like one devotee mentioned, thinking I'm going to go to India, but I really don't want to go to Heathrow Airport or another airport. You've got to go to the airport. You can't avoid it. So one cannot avoid attaining Sattva Gun. Of course, how one attains that, the method, is that we could discuss. But the important point I'm trying to make here is that we have to come to the mode of goodness. And to some degrees, I'm going to make a few points now, actually. Srila Vyasadeva gives that clue. Secondly, there's a very interesting verse, Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmana Hitaya Cha Jugatitaya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Now, very important verse. Interesting to meditate on this. Namo Brahmanya Devaya. This means actually that the Krishna, sometimes we miss this part, Namo Brahmanya Devaya, he's actually the god of the Brahmins. Krishna is the deity of the Brahminical class. Namo Brahmanya Devaya. There are many deities, but he is. And then Go Brahman Hitayacha, he's the protector of the cows and the Brahmins. He's Jagatitaya Krishna, he's the protector, the well-wisher of the whole world, and we pay obeisances to Lord Krishna. Very important. The cows and the Brahmins. Brahmins means leaders. Cows means your economic base. Occasionally, I want to make a few points here, practical points. Occasionally, some devotees think if we live in the village, we'll develop the mode of goodness. If we all just move to the villages and develop self-sufficient communities, that will actually be enough to actually situate us in the mode of goodness. That may be important, but it's not actually the whole equation. There needs to be the Brahminical culture, which means there must be education, actually. There must be culture. There must be morality. I want to discuss some of these. A few points. Occasionally devotees say that we need no qualification in terms of material assets, and that's true. To come to devotional service, we don't need any particular assets. Our learning, our beauty, birth in a good family, and so on, our wealth, that's not going to actually bring us devotional service. But it is also true that actually when we practice devotional service, we should develop piety. If we practice properly, we will develop piety and moral conduct. We will develop knowledge and discernment, and we will develop detachment and introspection. The results of the other yogas will come. They must be there. Otherwise, we're not that advanced. The other thing I'd like to say, and I'm going to just be 5 more minutes, is that actually we need to be careful about condemning other paths. There's an interesting verse in the 2nd chapter of this 1st canto, verse 26, and this is really interesting. I'll read the English. Those who are serious about liberation are certainly non-envious, and they respect all. Yet they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship only the all-blissful forms of Lord Vishnu and his plenary portions. It's very interesting, actually, prior to saying that they reject the other deities, the narrative says there that actually they're not doing that because they're envious. So one needs to be very, very careful about envy and resentment and criticizing others, other religions, other paths, based on envy. But it's mentioned here that that's not the motive when the devotees reject the other deities. So that kind of exclusivity, where we're actually pointing Namo Brahmanya Devaya to Krishna and not other deities, is not based on envy or bodily identification. So it's not our business to condemn. We have no business condemning everyone. But if we're fulfilled, it's mentioned fulfillment, happiness, if we're fulfilled, we won't have this criticizing mentality. If we're dissatisfied, there will be a tendency to criticize. We have to have that fulfillment one way or another. And that fulfillment comes through relationships. Even in this world, the psychologists and others will tell us that actually one of the greatest assets for seeing ourselves through difficult times is to have loving relationships. A good relationship. That will help us. That will bring us satisfaction in life. And this is part of our philosophy, very, very important to keep in mind. I'm going to read a quote because actually the discussion is, and we'll see how this chapter evolves, the discussion is, what about other goals in life? How do we do it? Particularly in schools, this is a challenge. Do we teach just about Krishna, or do we train our children for a livelihood? There's a big discussion on this. Some think that actually we don't need to train our children for a livelihood. We train them in character only, and everything else will come. I personally think there's evidence in Shastra that actually there is also training for livelihood. There's a lot of debates on this issue. But I'm just going to read this quote and then take some questions. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur from the Chaitanya Shikshamrita. The secondary roles, he's talking about secondary roles. Remember, we're talking about the ultimate good, devotional roles. And we're talking about secondary goods, if you like. The secondary rules are of 3 types. Rules regarding self. rules regarding society, rules regarding the afterlife. Rules regarding the self are of two categories, those for the body and those for the mind. Those rules to keep a person's body properly nourished so that they can remain healthy are the bodily rules. Such things as regulated drinking, eating, sleeping, exercise, and for sickness, prescriptions for cure are bodily rules. If people do not follow these rules, they cannot pass through life smoothly. If they do not follow the mental rules, their power of realization, concentration, imagination, contemplation, and judgment will be weak and will not properly function. There will be no advancement in arts and science, and moreover, one will not be able to take the mind from material thoughts and direct it to thoughts of God. As a result, sinful thoughts and atheistic attitude will dominate the mind. Finally, a person will become no better than a beast. Therefore, these bodily and mental rules are very necessary for success in human life. Just going to conclude a little quickly. We don't want to forget the goal, Krishna Prem. We don't want to water down the message, but we also don't want to make Krishna consciousness inaccessible to people in general. We need to somehow or other connect it to their needs, their interests, and their talents. I'm going to read a quote, which is coming up in the next chapter. The best thing, after all, to get relief from all material activities and engage oneself completely in hearing the The best thing, after all, to get relief from all material activities is to engage oneself completely in the hearing the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. But in the case of the absence of such an opportunity, in other words, or if we're not able to do that, one should try to engage in the service of the Lord everything for which one has specific attraction. And that is the way of peace and prosperity. So again, the ultimate goal must be there. That cannot be lost. But as this chapter progresses, and keep an eye out, it's very interesting to see the progression of this chapter. We see that actually we also have to be able to connect everything that's worthy in human life to Krishna consciousness for our own benefit and for the benefit of others. Let me read one more quote and then I'll take a question. Human intellect is developed for advancement of learning in the matter of art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, economics, politics, etc. By culture of such knowledge, the human society can attain perfection in life. The perfection of life culminates in the realization of the Supreme Being, Vishnu. When advancement of knowledge is applied in the service of the Lord, the whole thing becomes absolute. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 5, verse 22. Thank you. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Questions or comments, please? Radha Mohan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Rasa, good to see you, Haribol.
Nice to see you.
You were saying how pointing out the dangers of believing that there were no absolutes, and the example you gave at the beginning was, for example, a Catholic faith or Buddhist faith or Hindu faith. Oh, that's fine for you. If that's your reality, if that's your truth, that's truth. At the same, and I was thinking that you were saying that this is essentially faulty because there is an absolute, there is a higher thing which is Christian consciousness and everything. However, I also thinking that, for example, let's say someone's on another path, Buddhism, Christianity, whatever. Could it be argued that is right because of their own circumstances and conditioning and their own ability, that is right for them, in the sense that, okay, they're not reaching perhaps the higher echelons of self-realization, but that's all that they can manage in this lifetime. So you could actually say, well, that's fine for you. It really is fine for them, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, there is some degree, and I think you put it nicely, there has to be that consideration of the context in which we find ourselves. It's a very interesting discussion, and these debates are going to actually become very pertinent as ISKCON develops. They're already quite relevant in certain places where we're arguing. I've heard discussions where we're talking about Vedic culture versus Western culture, and I'm going, what? They don't seem like opposites to me. So a lot of issues regarding our own culture, and what do we do with our own culture? If I'm born in Britain as I was, do I completely jettison the cultural and moral capital I have? Or is there something within British culture that's related to the absolute? Is there something in Greek culture or Italian culture? We've already adopted pizza and offered it to an Indian god. So, yeah, I think there's a degree that you need to look at the context, but then without slipping into relativism, where we're actually saying everything is the same. And actually, I think one of the useful ways of doing that, I'm going to make a point, and excuse me here, Sattva-gun, Brahminical culture. The 3 gunas is a very interesting model that we in ISKCON do not engage with adequately, because there's 12.5% of the verses in the Bhagavad Gita refer to the 3 guna. In the Bhagavatam, it's 4.5% of the verses refer to the 3 guna. One devotee kindly did some research. Very useful model, because when we ask, is this sattvic, is this rajasic, is this tamasic, we've stripped away some of those designatory ideas about morality. Indra, you're bewildered. We're not doing it on the basis of designation. Is this Indian? Is this English? Is this Vedic or not Vedic? I mean, obviously it's a Vedic concept. We can actually apply that sattvic, that model, to all situations. Now, I'm not going to go completely the way and say that therefore we should go on the altar wearing sattvic Western clothes. We can, I think some of the particularities of our tradition are important. And yet again, I must say that actually being in Mayapur for about 8 months and wearing a dhoti all the time, coming back and putting on trousers felt just a little uncomfortable. I mean, I do it and I need to do it and I'm happy to do it. But there is something quite sattvic about robes. I'm going to say robes. I'm not going to say dhoti or whatever, because there are big questions about it. You're right. We have to somehow work this out a little bit, somewhere between the soggy sands of relativism and the hard rocks of dogmatism, absolutism. Yes, another question. Does that satisfy you reasonably?
I think it's about the balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Understand that we're non-sectarian in our nature. At the same time, we're, like everyone else, we're also saying, but we're the best. But we're non-sectarian.
It's a big one. Yeah, it's a big one. We're not sectarian, but if you don't take Lord Chaitanya's mercy, you're lost. You're going to hell. Yeah. Work it out. And don't try and solve it overnight in 2 minutes. I'm not going to give you a solution. I'm going to leave that with you. You have to work it out. We have to engage with these tensions and dialectics, if you like. Another question or comment? Prabhu. Oh, Indresh, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
I'm just going to suggest that one way that we can bring relativism into the absolute is sit with devotees and ask them, how are you experiencing Krishna consciousness? Because that's, we've got the absolute, but we're all going to be going through different experiences, and I think that's something that we don't do. We just judge people by, have you done your rounds today? Have you been to Mangalati? But so what's it like to struggle through your rounds? I had one devotee once said to me, was saying, oh, I'm doing my service because, I should. And I turned to him and said, it sounds like you don't want to do that service. And he said, yes, I don't want to do it. That's what he was experiencing, but he was holding it down with shoulds. So I suggest that just, meeting devotees, listening to them, understanding what they're experiencing, that brings in the relative.
Yeah, I think you're right there, that actually we've got the absolute Lord Krishna and we've also got our absolute self. But actually, having that conversation, the way I express it is that there's got to be dialogue between our experiences and Shastra. There's got to be dialogue. When absolutism becomes the Bhagavad Gita says it, and I believe it because the Bhagavad Gita says it. No. The Bhagavad Gita says this, and I sometimes think, really? There's a difference between how I see and how Shastra sees. And we have to negotiate that. We have to become purified. There's an interesting story to exemplify this. Those of you who are awake, please listen. That Srila Prabhupada on one lecture, and I don't have the reference, I'm sorry, but he was mentioning how once he went, as a young Gaudiya Vaishnava, if you like, he was in the ashram of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and at that moment, someone announced there's a snake in the ashram. The news got to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he said, kill it. And so they went and they killed the snake. And Srila Prabhupada says on this lecture, he states in this lecture, I was concerned. How is it a Vaishnava can kill a snake? And then a little later I read in Shastra that actually a hinkster is there, but one can kill an envious living being. That's okay. And Srila Prabhupada, and then I was satisfied. He was thinking, he was thinking, why is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, or he had some doubt. So there was a conversation going on. Not that I just adopt Shastra blindly and don't have a conversation. It says so. And I hear devotees occasionally going, I'm not saying it, Prabhupada says it. But I'd like to hear what your opinion is. Because realization is extremely important. In the first purport to the first verse of this chapter, realization is mentioned. Far more important, Srila Prabhupada says, realization is more important than parrot-like repetition. Without realization, there's no life. The tradition, we die and the tradition dies. The tradition will not be carried forward simply by ink on paper. I'm not saying that these books are not sacred, highly sacred, but there needs to be the realization to carry forward. Also, Book Bhagavatam, Person Bhagavatam must be there. Realization. And actually, unless we have that dialogue, we engage with our own experiences, what goes on for us. The inner life. Here, Vyasadeva is exploring the inner. I'm dissatisfied. Why am I dissatisfied? He's thinking. Introspection must be there. Does that? Yeah. Answer. Prabhu, if you want to go, it's past, so you'll go. I'll go on for 3 minutes, but feel free to go if you want to, please.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, I was thinking also that if there's realization and we can perceive how much the other person can take, we can speak accordingly.
Yes.
If they're on another faith. There's I'm just thinking about Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes he says, it doesn't matter which religion, one can love God. Then he's also made the statement, if you don't know who God is, how are you going to love Him? And then we talk about comparative religion, so that's there as well. And then Srila Prabhupada says, Bhagavatam, there is no competition, there is no comparison. So he also sees in what politically correct format we're in. Like if you're on the radio, because I've been on the radio and they asked me some questions, and I just say very broad things, very just nice things. But then I've spoke to someone who's very open, and then I've also said, look, there's no comparison. You know, you look at 10 Commandments, you look at Bhagavatam. It's like, so I think then the end conclusion must be just depends on your own realization and who you're talking to.
Yeah, context and realization. Of course, whether one's doing it just because it's a PR exercise, I'd be a little careful about thinking that we're actually only being nice because it's a PR exercise. We actually need to have that connection with others. And we need to, I'd suggest, understand we're here in this room now discussing only by the mercy of our spiritual master. It's by his grace that we're not in that position that others are in without Krishna consciousness, and we feel grateful. And with that feeling of gratitude, we're able to extend to others. That must be there. That compassion must be there. But that also comes from understanding it is mercy that we're here. There's a wonderful saying again, talking about different cultures, there's a wonderful saying in England that you've probably heard it, there but for the grace of God go I. So when you see someone who's suffering in some way, or perhaps there's some moral turpitude, and they're suffering because of it, you say, there but for the grace of God go I. I would be like that, but for the grace of God. So to some degree it's a question of attitude, not just truth. So one should never lose one's values in the name of being right. Philosophical truth and seeing things correctly is absolutely important. But if we start arguing that I am right, and in the course of doing so, and you only have to look at the internet to see this, then we've lost it. And actually we must move towards virtue. Vedigaya hara charito. The spiritual master is glorified for his charita. Now the rules and the practices are important. The knowledge is important. But we must move towards virtue. And that means realization as well. That must be there, actually. We should try and develop virtue. We should not ignore morality or any of these things that support our Krishna consciousness. That's trying to get across. Time is up. I'm sorry I've gone 5 minutes over. Thank you very much, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you.